Good day, everyone. Thank you for watching this. This is the recreation of the talk that I gave at the Emergency Winter Shelter Task Force meeting today, October 22nd at First Congregational Church about the emergency shelter crisis in Colorado Springs. Great attendance. Thank you so much for everybody that turned out. Unfortunately, this presentation that I worked on we couldn't see because the sun was streaming right in the windows of the church. So I'm redoing it real quickly here so people can watch it, especially our Speakers Bureau, so that they could see and hear what I was trying to say instead of just me stumbling through it, throwing out facts and information without actually having the visual reference. So this is just a recreation of the talk that was given today, but hopefully with a little bit more clarity and detail now that we can actually see what's going on. So winter is coming, and we got a lot of people trapped outside because we do not have enough emergency shelter capacity. Our mission is to save fingers, toes, limbs, and lives and create impactful solutions to the winter shelter shortage. My name is Trig Bungard, and I am the co-founder of Blackbird Outreach. We're a team of volunteers that go into camps, make friends, and gain trust, and deliver survival gear, connect people to services and shelter, kind of a first lifeline back to normal life as we find the people that are hiding outside all over Colorado Springs. Not just the camps you see, there are actually a lot of hidden camps. You'd be surprised where people are. I'm also the co-executive director of CCA, the Coalition for Compassion and Action. That is the parent company of Blackbird Outreach. We are a advocacy and lobbying arm for the fight to end homelessness in Colorado Springs. We are a 501c4, whereas Blackbird Outreach is a 501c3. So you have one kind of activism and lobbying dedicated CCA branch, and then you have the fully service-oriented compassion, volunteer-oriented Blackbird. And I also sit on the Continuum of Care Governing Board for the Pikes Peak region. That is the body that of stakeholders that oversees how HUD funding is allocated every fiscal year. So, the overview of today's task force agenda. This is in past tense. We're going to run through the shelter crisis, what's going on. I'm going to describe the task force teams. Then all the task forces met, and that was awesome to see everybody teaming up. And then they elected their leads, and then all the team leads had a powwow at the end. All right, the problem in Colorado Springs. Homelessness is increasing year over year, except for an anomaly in 2015. Officially, as of this year, 2017, when we did the pit count, that's the point-in-time survey. It's done every year. We try to make it on the same day, so this year's day was January 28th. We go out and we do a survey of all the people we can find in shelters outside, and we found 457 people were surviving outside, 1,415 total that were experiencing homelessness. We had many more in permanent supportive housing and such, but that's a different category. Once you're off the street, obviously you're not considered homeless anymore. The CSPD HOT team, that's Colorado Springs Police Department Homeless Outreach Team, estimates that the true number of people unsheltered outside might be 50% higher, or around 700 unsheltered people. So these are the total literally homeless counts on the right there from 2011 through 2016. As you can see, there's always been a steady rise, and that is for a number of reasons. Housing prices are going out of reach for many households. Wages have not kept pace with the rent increase. It's actually increased 57% over the last 10 years, and we've only seen a 24% increase in wages. So huge disparity between housing cost and salary overall. One thing it is not attributed to is marijuana. Having medical and rec marijuana available regionally is not reflected in our actual survey numbers. We are not having a quote-unquote influx of people into our state because We know this. We asked where people were living before they became homeless, and for year after year, the vast majority, usually around 60 to 66%, so roughly two-thirds, are from El Paso County. The others are from outside El Paso County, or they refuse to give an answer. What's interesting is if you break this down by Colorado, unofficially, unfortunately, I could not gather the data to put this pie chart up. We are looking more around 72% of people are from El Paso County itself who are living outside. So more of the problem. In 2017, we had a net gain of 222 year-round shelter beds by opening the brand new low-barrier Springs Rescue Mission. It's an awesome facility. If you have not been down there to check it out, it is groundbreaking. Low-barrier care, which means they'll serve anybody. High, drunk, out of their minds, sexual offenders, violent felons. You can get in there and have shelter. However, a decrease of 210 seasonal shelter beds, i.e. the closing of the Salvation Army Weber Street winter shelter, and a decrease of 5 overflow beds resulted in a total net gain of only 7 beds between the 3 categories of emergency shelter compared to the year before. So, in short, even though we opened Springs Rescue Mission with 222 new beds, we only saw an actual net gain of 7 beds. Last year during the pit, we did have 69 beds empty, which was a little bit over 12%. However, most of those unfilled beds were at Salvation Army RG Montgomery Shelter. So that was 50 high barrier beds. High barrier, if you're already gathering with low barriers, is the exact opposite. You can't come in drunk, you can't come in using, you can't come in high on marijuana, you can't come in if you're a sexual offender, you can't come in if you're a felon. You also can't come in and use high bunks, the top bunks, if you are have at any point had back surgeries, hip surgeries, knee surgeries, anything that would possibly endanger you climbing up onto a bunk. You also cannot come in because of the policies. So the barriers at Salvation Army are much higher, and that's why it's not surprising that there were 50 open beds. However, in many years, they are full. As you look back here at these bottom numbers on these graphs, that's the actual occupancy rate. So the top numbers on the gray is how many emergency beds we had every year, and this is a projection. So this is this pit we're talking about. This pit count was 605 emergency beds, 88.8% occupied. 2016, we had almost 100% occupied rate for all the shelter beds, etc. However, one thing that I don't think many people understand, we have always had people outside. So the pink is people who were surveyed outside. So even though we have hundreds and hundreds of emergency shelter beds, and for some reason we've been getting this narrative over the last couple of years that we've always had capacity, people are choosing not to go to shelter. Well, you can do the basic math. 10% of 526 is around 52 beds. Well, there were 230 people outside. Clearly no capacity. 5% of 46 beds, that's 23 beds. 269 people outside. Clearly no capacity. And so on and so forth. This year, obviously, we had some of the highest vacancy. That's still only 69 beds, which leaves almost 400 people outside. Clearly still not capacity. Excuse me. So this projection is actually 611 beds. That's how many beds we know we have. And then something might be coming online that unfortunately I cannot talk about that would add around 150 beds. That's this gray area right here. Which in theory, if we did not see the typical increase in people outside, we would still have around 300 people outside this winter. So still, even with this exciting addition of capacity that may or may not happen, which is why I can't talk about it, we're still really short. We still have an entire Springs Rescue Mission of capacity of people outside. So that is a base explanation of why we're in a crisis. Is every year, as long as we've been tracking, we have always had no capacity and hundreds of people outside. So in concert with those increases in people outside, unfortunately, we are also seeing a marked increase in the criminalization of survival behaviors. So these are tickets for no camping in public lands, Ordinance 9.6.110, and no camping in parks, Ordinance 9.9404. This ticket data was gathered from the annual reports of CSPD, and as you can see, for a number of years it was, climbing, but still reasonable. And then as of 2015, it has just increased exponentially, and we aren't even done with 2017, and there's already 174 no camping tickets on the books. And bear in mind, we don't have capacity, so we are ticketing people when there is literally nowhere for all of them to go. So the adage that there are beds available, so we ticket, doesn't really make sense when you know that there are hundreds and hundreds of more people behind. Say you were to fill those 69 beds, there's still hundreds more people out there. But the graph tells the tale. Enforcement has increased exponentially, the highest this year. So here's our solution. We created teams to address the shelter crisis. The leadership committee is composed of all the team leads, so there's 9. So team lead for Speakers Bureau, team lead for connectors, and so on. The teams are divided into 3 groups: advocacy and fundraising, outreach and storm response, shelter and planning. So again, the leadership committee is comprised of all 9 team leads from the main 3 tri-teams: advocacy and fundraising, outreach and storm response, shelter planning. So let's take a closer look at advocacy and fundraising. Those 3 teams underneath that group is the Speakers Bureau. These are literally people willing to go out and talk to stakeholders like churches and civic groups and business associations, etc., etc. Anybody that we can talk to, 5 people, 500 people, 2,000 people, we really don't care. Got a pretty robust Speakers Bureau today. I'm super stoked about that. They are tasked with crafting a more effective message amongst themselves based on the groups and their own personal preferences and how they're comfortable communicating. Using these slides, completely tossing these slides, whichever. Fundraising. This was great. We had a really robust fundraising group come together, people with experience fundraising who will raise emergency capital to support emergency shelter, both current and future. So there is a ton of need for capital, both for currently operating shelters and for any future shelters we might be able to stand up for the hundreds of people still left outside this winter. It seems like an overwhelming problem, but I know if we talk to enough people and everybody gives just something, we are going to raise enough money quickly, especially as the full scope of the crisis becomes clear. Then the connectors. I love these people. Their entire job is to make connections, calling out to those stakeholder groups, the churches, the pastors, the mission giving meetings, the business community groups, etc., to set those meetings, make a quick elevator pitch, and set those speaking engagements for either the Speakers Bureau or the fundraisers. They're essentially just creating the opportunities that we need to share the full extent of the crisis and the need. All right, outreach and storm response. These are my people. As one of the co-founders of Blackbird Outreach, I spent a lot of time out in the camps. It's my favorite thing. I think it's really important work, and boy, does it change people's hearts and minds once they get out there. And the strange, unfamiliar alien other, that homeless person, suddenly becomes a real person to you. It's really powerful stuff. We've created 3 teams based on your level of comfort. One is the camp spotter. Boy, these people are essential right now as we need to try to keep track of where everybody is. This is literally just keeping an app on your phone that as you're out doing your normal everyday thing, doing your jog, doing your hike, doing your bike, when you come across a camp, just stop, tag that camp on the map, and that's it. You don't need to interact. You don't need to go down in the camp, make connections. That's the outreach team's responsibility. But these are just our scouts. They're out tagging stuff and making sure we know where people are at. As that map becomes more robust, we are going to be able to start tracking displacements and who has been moved on, etc., etc. Really vital data as we try to get a full grip on how many people are out there, the full extent of the crisis, etc. So, if you're an active person in Colorado Springs, this is a great way to connect. Camp outreach. Like I said, this is my favorite part of volunteerism that we do. Courageous volunteers willing to visit camps, make connections, gain trust, and create hope. And unfortunately, I wrote that a little too saccharine sweet because I do like to caution people. This is really tough stuff. You are going to go out and you are going to make human connections with the most vulnerable population of people in our city. And as winter comes on and as you grow to know them, you will see them suffer, and you may even see them die, and it's tough. So I always caution people who are interested in camp outreach. It's really awesome work. It's super compassionate work, but it is extraordinarily tough. I'll just say it, traumatizing work sometimes. And we do our best to offer support, but please go into it with your eyes wide open. It's going to be really emotionally hard when you start realizing all the people who need and hurt and you can't do anything about it. Hopefully this process will help a little bit with that helplessness, but I doubt it will ever really go away until we have a super robust system in place in terms of shelter and service capacity. All right, then another one of the new teams, storm response. These are amazing drivers and amazing vehicles ready to respond during storms to take people to shelter, assuming there's shelter available. Unfortunately, there's not. Springs Rescue Mission has been at capacity nearly the entire year. They're going to try to increase mat space this year, but the reality is there may not be anywhere to take people to if we can't get churches and other stakeholders to open up facilities during storms. But let's be positive. Let's say that all these teams do their amazing work and we start getting additional shelter space. This is where the storm response drivers roll out with our outreach workers to camps. Outreach workers have gained the trust of these individuals in the camps. They come to the car with their basic survival gear, their essentials, and they roll off to storage and to get people to shelter. So obviously this is a critical part of, since the camps are all over the city, but it's a critical part of that winter shelter response. Just to give you a little idea of the scope, these are the camps that were tagged by CCA Blackbird workers and HOT during the PIT, the Point in Time Survey, January last year. So not much coverage out east and in the Briargate, Stratton Hills? Can't remember. But there are just so many camps hidden out there. So we have a very large metropolitan footprint, and there are people surviving outside all over it. So we definitely have our work cut out for us. We're recreating a brand new map for us to start working off of for this emergency shelter response. Shelter planning and coordination. So, boy, I hope we can accomplish something in this realm. This is actually addressing that shortage. Starting with shelter volunteers coordination. So all of our city shelters, both current and future, need volunteers. And so this is literally rallying and coordinating volunteers to respond to R.J. Montgomery's needs, Springs Rescue Mission's needs, Urban Peaks needs, and then if we can start standing up emergency shelter spaces, obviously filling those volunteer staffing needs as well. Land property acquisition. This is really entering into the unmarked territory. There's never been an effort to stand up emergency shelter this quickly. So we need very creative people with experience in real estate, commercial real estate. If they own property, we need to find, coordinate, and create new shelter space in Colorado Springs. So, if churches call up and say, we're willing to open up during storms, this team, land and property acquisition, they coordinate with them and the shelter policy and planning to make sure that everything's in place that we can bring people to that property. And then obviously in a perfect world, we're going to find additional property that we can pop up as new emergency shelters. Low barrier, mind you, low barrier emergency shelter. Shelter policy and planning. This is the in the weeds, best practices. Creating if we actually get additional emergency shelter space to open up, what is the policy, the guiding principles behind that? How are we going to run it? That kind of thing. I don't actually know much about shelter policy, so fortunately, some really smart people do who are now on that team. If you're interested in any of these teams I'm describing, at the end of this, I'll be able to connect you with those team leads, and you can join any team that you feel called to serve on. Initial team expectations. We are in such a compacted schedule here. These may seem pretty hardcore, but it's really what we got to do, and I think we're actually going to be able to pull this off with technology. For the individual teams, please try to meet at least weekly, and I think Google Hangouts and email and phone conferencing, etc., will allow us to do that. Google Hangouts is what I would recommend because you can actually see who's talking when instead of it that confusing, like everybody talking over each other. Email chains, don't really care. Let's just try to stay in contact with the teams at least weekly. Tri-team leads. So these are the people in the three categories. These. So the 3 team leads that make up advocacy and fundraising, the 3 team leads that make up outreach and storm response, the 3 team leads that make up shelter and planning. We'd like them to try to communicate at least daily, just a phone call, check in, see what everybody else is working on in your particular tri-team, so we can collaborate those efforts. And then obviously the leadership committee of every team lead, we need to talk whenever is appropriate, and we're already putting those communications in place, and we're just trying to help keep this entire ship on course to try to accomplish something amazing before winter really gets here, which is only about a month and a half. Pretty crazy, but we can do it. All right, how to connect to the task force. Okay, so here you see advocacy and fundraising. Obviously, that's one tri-team. Outreach and response. That's one tri-team. Shelter and planning coordination. That's one tri-team. Here you have the individual team, Speakers Bureau, fundraising, so on and so on. Here are your team leads. Here are their emails. And if you would like to jump on board with any of these teams, unless you're team lead, there really is no commitment. You just come when you can. We'd love to see your beautiful face and heart, and please come help support the work of these teams, and especially these crazy loving team leads that have stepped up to fill that role. I love you people. All right, so here's how to connect, and again, if you want to serve on any of these teams, please reach out to the appropriate team lead, and stay tuned. We're loading in the entire communication system. We're loading in all the details, and you'll be seeing updates all week on how this is going to keep progressing and where we're speaking at next, etc., etc. So, again, thank you everybody for the amazing turnout today for the first organizing meeting of this emergency shelter task force. I know it's crazy to think that we can stand up shelter like this quickly, but we kind of have to. We owe it to the hundreds and hundreds of people that have been outside for so long and frankly have gone uncounted and ignored. Putting a human face back on the homelessness crisis, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to save fingers, toes, and lives. Oh yeah, and then this is where to connect with CCA and Blackbird, Facebook, website. Love you everybody, God bless, and we'll talk very, very soon. Share this with family and friends. Like our Facebook page. Email the team leads. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye-bye.